Alright, so step one of this is removal of the tires. Alright, I got my 17mm socket on my impact gun, and El cheapo version of a spacer. I never bought wheel spacers. I just got a couple of washers put behind there to get the tire to clear the suspension, because it wasn't clearing the suspension first when I put it on, because the traction nitros are a little bit wider, but not that much wider, so you know, 3/16 I guess out, and they cleared. Anyway, that's the easy part. We have to take off the brake and the tie rod end, and once we have that out of the way, we're gonna pull, grab my light, we're gonna pull the drive shaft, the CV axle shaft, and we have to pull the drive shaft. Have to pull the drive shaft in there as well. Prop shaft, I guess they call it. Like I say, I'm not a mechanic. I have worked on bikes for a long time, my own stuff, just something I enjoy doing. So I'm not afraid to get into something. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is remove the tie rod end. Tie rod end needs to be replaced. There is a bit of play in it, the inner one more so. See in there. Outer seems to be fine. But anyway, I think they come in sets right and left. So we remove this cotter pin here, which prevents your nut from backing off. I haven't seen a nut back off on these, but oh my god, should have just cut it off. There we go. Cotter pin is out. This 15mm wrench goes on top. Okay, so I got a 17mm deep socket on the bottom, and get the nut off. This is super difficult, just one hand. Anyway, 17mm on the bottom. Take this nut off. There we go. It's also a good habit to keep all your nuts and bolts together. So now I'm gonna pop this. There we go. So I'll put this back in here without going back in there. I'll put that back in, and I'll put the washer and nut back on it. There we go, with the washer and the nut put back on there, just to keep it all together. That's a part that is going to have to be replaced. Alright, so next is brake assembly. So there is a bolt here and this bolt here, covered under all this dirt. This one and this one, these two bolts need to come out. That way we can pull the caliper. Alright, so oddly enough, a lot of the bolts are metric. These are not. 13mm was too big. The half is a little bit smaller, and lo and behold, the 1/2 inch is a snug fit. So we'll remove these with that, this one, and the one below it here. caliper assembly will pull off, and we'll hang it over here off the tie rod for now. Start them here, and I'll do the same thing with the other one. Alright, so that's the bolts screwed back into the caliper, just so we keep an eye on them without losing them. And check your pads while you're at it. These pads look pretty good. The next task is to remove the lower ball joint from the A-arm. I only replaced the ball joints in this thing probably about 6 months ago, so I don't know how difficult this is going to be to remove, but it wasn't easy to remove back then. So anyway, we'll see what happens. And the first thing to do, of course, is remove the cotter pin and take that nut off, crown nut. Crown nuts are, from my experience, very soft, so you really got to be careful when you're removing them, and if you hit them with a hammer or anything, you'll damage all the threads. So we'll get that removed there now. Alright, so that's out. 14 mil. And remove it. Now, if it doesn't remove because it spins around with the wrench, we'll have to use an impact driver, and the impact driver with a pry bar to keep it tight. But, we'll see how this goes now. Came off pretty good, thankfully. Now, the worst step with this is separating this from this. Normally what I do is I try to give it a few smacks. I try to pry on it first, see if it moves, and I got a pickle fork that I'll put in here and see if we can separate it. And if that doesn't work, we'll have to try something even more drastic. Try to get this in around here. There we go. Now the ball joints were recently done, so it's probably why they weren't super difficult to remove. A few smacks and they came out. When I did the ball joints, which are down here, I took the strut out with the axle attached to it. It was a lot easier for me to do it that way. So I might take the axle out with the strut at the same time. The strut comes apart very easily. There's the bolt here, and there's another one down here. Once you have them removed, the entire strut assembly kind of comes apart, and you can, like, the spring comes separate and the inside shock pulls out of this whole piece, and then we can pull out on the CV axle. So let's see what happens. People might wonder why we just don't stick a pry bar in here and try to pull it out. Number one, they usually stick in there pretty bad. Number two, the differential is aluminum, and there's a good possibility you might crack it by prying hard on it. So the best method is to actually use some sort of puller and pull that out, but since I don't have one, we're going to have to improvise. So I figured I'd try to loosen it up a little bit before I got started, but an hour later is just starting to move, and I had to make up a couple of things. I said earlier not to pry, and as you can see, I even tried prying, but as soon as I started marring it up a little bit, I stopped. What I have devised is, right now I had an old grinder that has been thrown in the garbage for a while, but I still have the tool for removing the disc, so I put that in across where the bearing is too. Balance that there now. Then I took the pickle fork head earlier. I actually have two, and I cut the top off of it and had that in there as a wedge, and was giving it taps on with a hammer, wedging it in there, and lo and behold, after some time it started to move. And now I'm at the point where I'm still leaving that in there. I'm just taking another piece of steel and putting that here. I leave the other one there because I don't want it to damage. And then I took the pickle fork, drove it here, and like I say, this is one-handed, one on the camera. I started tapping it, and in doing so, the axle shaft is actually pulling out. So this is the method I'm using. You just got to be careful of your fan, of course, and make sure you're not striking anything around it. I've just been giving the light taps like that with my hammer that just fits in there. And a little bit of space, just been giving it a few taps. Then every now and then I'll do that. And as you can see, the shaft is starting to pull out, and we'll get to a point where I should be able to just give it a few good hard tugs, and out it comes. So once again, I need something to hold my camera with, because I don't think it's at that point yet. I was getting close, so I'll find something else to wedge in there now and bring it out another little bit, and that's how I'm doing that. So after a good few hard pulls, probably 10 or 15 good hard pulls, once I had it started, the axle now is out. It's sort of rusted in. I guess it hasn't moved in well, 14 years, but the splines and everything in there look good, but the bearing, I think, is shot. But anyway, on to the next side, which hopefully will be the same, and you just repeat what I just did. Alright.